Welcome, honored guest, to the birthplace of our dynasty.
How's it going, everyone? My name is Iron Stark, and today I'll be showing a build centered around the Bloodfiend's Arm, one of the new Colossal Weapons in the Shadow of Erdtree DLC. To begin, the Bloodfiend's Arm shares the same light attack chain as most Colossal Weapons. What sets it apart is its heavy attacks, where the character performs a relatively fast chopping slam that is shared with the Great Club and the Shadow Sunflower Blossom. This heavy attack can do some of the highest stance damage in a single hit in Elden Ring, inflicting 47 stance damage when fully charged. What makes the Bloodfiend's Arm's heavy attack unique from the Great Club's is every heavy attack has a Blood Splash A.o.E. Now in my testing, this Blood Splash heavy attack has a lot of peculiarities that I wanted to go over. First, it does inflict fire damage, as demonstrated by hitting these barrels and this finger creeper. Second, if you have the Bloodfiend's Arm set to an affinity that inflicts a status, be it blood, poison, or cold, the splash will inflict the status even if the weapon itself doesn't hit. For a demonstration on Mother Grail, here's the blood affinity. Notice that I am not hitting her with the weapon, and intentionally whiffing, and with only the splashes alone, I inflict bleed. Now with the poison affinity. Again, I'm intentionally not hitting her, only using the splash AoEs, and I end up inflicting poison. Lastly, with the cold affinity. Again, still not hitting her, only using the splash, and with that alone I end up inflicting frostbite in a few hits. What this means is if you have the Bloodfiend's Arm set to a status affinity and you connect with both the weapon and the Blood Splash AoE, you're pretty much guaranteed to inflict that status. Lastly, and this is just something I've seen on the internet, the Blood Splash on heavy attacks does not have native bleed or status on its own. For another demonstration, I set the Bloodfiend's Arm to a cult, and let's attack Grail. As you can see, I'm going to keep slamming my arm into Grail and nothing. No status buildup. Nothing, which is very strange because the weapon does have blood flame particle effects on hit, but I guess those are just for show. At any rate, with this build, I set the Bloodfiend's Arm to the blood affinity, where it gets a C in strength with a scaling value of 64. And a C in Arcane with a scaling value of 73. With the stats this build uses, my Bloodfiend's Arm has a whopping 199 bleed buildup per hit. And keep in mind, that's excluding the additional bleed buildup that will occur because of the heavy attack blood splashes. So this thing is doing over 200 bleed with each heavy attack. So yeah, the nerf did next to nothing in terms of stopping this weapon from being an absolute monster. The Ashes of War this build uses are primarily Cragblade and Royal Knight's Resolve. Because this weapon's heavy attacks hit so hard and inflict so much stance and status damage, I wanted to focus on Ashes that further boosted the power of these heavy attacks. Cragblade is the more user-friendly option, as it adds 15% more damage and adds 10% more stance damage per hit and lasts for a minute, whereas Royal Knight's Resolve buffs your next attack by 80%, which potentially leads to much higher numbers, but you've only got a 10-second window to land an attack, and you consistently need to reapply it. The primary strategies of this build are laughably simple. Use charged heavy attacks to inflict immense status and stance damage, proccing blood loss and breaking boss posture constantly. You don't even need to necessarily worry about getting hit during the Bloodfiend arm's heavy attack, because it has some hyper armor. Worth mentioning, if you're up against a boss that is immune to bleed, you can always switch to either the heavy, fire, or occult affinities. The primary stats for this build are Strength at 59 and Arcane at 60 for weapon and status effect scaling, Endurance at 35 because Colossal Weapons are heavy and are stamina hogs. I would also consider having Vigor set to 60 as an essential stat, because unless your timing is immaculate, you can expect to at least tank some attacks when landing a charged heavy attack. The armor choices are mostly aesthetic, but have some practical purposes. I wanted to give this build a look like a deranged madman, itching for bloodlust. So the Omen Smirk mask, Rotten Gravekeeper's cloak, and heavy pieces of armor suited. The armor I'm using has 55 poise, and the Omen Smirk mask increases strength by 2. For talismans, this build mostly uses those that amplify its damage output, fostering the power of charged heavy attacks and increasing attack power when proccing blood loss or landing a critical hit. The two-handed sword talisman increases the power of all light and heavy attacks by 15% when two-handing. The axe talisman increases the power of charged heavy attacks by 10%. The next two talismans are where this build's damage can skyrocket, especially if triggering both of them at the same time. The Lord of Blood's Exultation increases attack power by 20% for 20 seconds when bleed is triggered, and the Blade of Mercy increases attack power by 20% for 20 seconds after performing a critical attack. With all these talismans combined, you can have instances where you deal over 65% more damage because they all stack multiplicatively, and this is before accounting for any additional buffs or Physick tiers. Other talismans this build can use are the Claw Talisman, as colossal jump attacks are very powerful, the Two-Headed Turtle Talisman to help with stamina regen, and the Dragon Crest Great Shield, because as I mentioned before, using a colossal weapon typically entails tanking attacks, at least occasionally. For buffs, this build only uses one, the Ash of War version of Golden Vow placed on a dagger, which is used right before a boss battle to give an 11.5% buff to damage and a 7.5% buff to damage negation. This build doesn't need any more spell buffs because most buffs are earned by either triggering the Lord of Blood's Exultation or Blade of Mercy. For Physick tiers, the setup is simple. Spiked Cracked tier for increased power to charged heavy attacks by 15% for 3 minutes, and the Stonebarb Cracked tier to increase stance damage dealt by 30% for 30 seconds, which is fine. Most bosses aren't going to survive past a minute with this build, and none in this showcase make it past 3 minutes. This is the power of the Bloodfiend's arm when two-handed. This is the power of the Bloodfiend's arm when two-handing and after using the Ash of War version of Golden Vow and Cragblade. This is the power of the Bloodfiend's arm when two-handing and at Shadow Blessing level 20. This is the power of a Bloodfiend's arm when two-handing, fully buffed, and at Shadow Blessing level 20. Let's also bear in mind with those attack ratings that this is before accounting for the Lord of Blood's Exultation or the Blade of Mercy being activated. All footage was recorded in NG+3 during the 1.12.3 patch, and as always, enjoy the showcase.
The mark of a true lord.
depths of your...